Dear children, I finally decided that if I'm going to get anything recorded for you, I better do it, although I'm not prepared today. I have made a few little things that I jotted down to try to remember, but I haven't got them in sequence, but I'm just going to tell the things about each one as you come along and hope that it'll kind of suffice. But I'd like to say that it's surely good advice to keep a day-to-day journal, because when you keep a few little things that you think are important in baby books for your children, and then give those to your baby books and depend on your memory, and then wait until you're almost 80 years old to try to think of the things in their life that was dear and precious to you, and there are so many, it's pretty hard to recall them all. But maybe I will think of things that you might have forgotten, and if not, it's going to be kind of fun anyway. But first of all, I want to thank my Heavenly Father for each one of you. I love you each one, and I love you all just the same. Each one of us is dear to me in your own individual, particular way, and each one fills a very dear spot in my heart. I'm so grateful for you, and I know that most of you are here because of miracles and the blessings of the Lord to your father and myself. And we are so grateful. We thank the Lord every day for you and for the good things in your life that you do. And that we pray that every day that you will stay close to the teachings of our Heavenly Father and follow close to Him and teach these same things to your family, to your children and your great-grandchildren, because we know that we have been blessed as a family to have the heritage that we have through our pioneer ancestors who gave so much to let us be born in this church under the covenant and partake of these blessings that we do partake of, because through the Church of Jesus Christ and the ordinances therein lies our only chance for eternal salvation, and that depends upon our diligence in keeping our covenants and the commandments and proving ourselves worthy while we're here upon this earth. And my greatest desire is for each one of you to live up to the things that you know are right, that we can all be an eternal family together someday. And I pray most of all that the Heavenly Father will forgive me of all of my faults and imperfections and my sins, so that I can be worthy to be your mother in that family that I hope will continue forever. And now let me say that I start before even Olene with our first baby. I guess it's just natural for every young girl throughout her years of developing and all to wonder and some kind worry about whether or not she'll be able to be a mother. I guess any true Latter-day Saint girl has a great desire to be a mother in Israel. That's one of the greatest and choicest blessings that can come to any of us. And why some of our sisters who are thinking in terms that aren't in keeping with our Heavenly Father would fight to have the priesthood when they have this blessing. This was our gift, the blessing of motherhood. And it's a big job in itself. If we do that, we wouldn't have time to perform all the functions of the priesthood. And so I'm sure in our Heavenly Father's wisdom, He gave the priesthood to the man, and He gave motherhood to the women, priestesshood, we might say, to the women, to be the co-creators with our Heavenly Father for our children, so that they could have bodies here on this earth, mortal bodies, to perform the things here that are necessary for their progression. I know you all know these things, but I want you to know that I have a testimony of how important they are and how how thankful to my Heavenly Father I am that I have been allowed to be a mother. And so it was with great anxiety that I waited for 2 years after we was married before we got our first little baby. And we looked forward with such hope to having this little child. I took a lot of guff from other people. I was taunted by my sister-in-law all the time, saying, "You folks just aren't smart enough to get children. Herman just isn't man enough to make a child," and all this kind of stuff. And I saw my friends our age having their children, and here I'd waited 2 years, and Lot had married younger than I had and had 2 or 3 little children. And when it came around to Mother's Day and I was not a mother and my friends were a mother and proud of their babies, it was hard. And I didn't know why. And so after we'd waited more than a year and still weren't to be parents, I decided to take it upon myself to go to the doctor. This was at the advice of my older sister. And so when I'd been over to see my folks, I went home on the mail and I made an appointment with the doctor to stop by. And on my way home, I did, and he said, he made an examination, and he said that I had a tipped uterus, and he thought he could give me some medicine that would relax that uterus so that I would probably get pregnant. He said most people, if they're not pregnant in 6 months, why, there's something to be concerned about. But he says at this time, I think that maybe if these pills don't help you get your child that you want so badly, then maybe there'll have to be an operation or something performed, and we will see what has to be done. Well, he gave me some tablets to take that's supposed to relax the muscles. And to my joy, it wasn't long until I found out I was pregnant. And then I took the ribbing again that it was the pills, not Herman, that was the father of the children. Of course, it was all in fun, but these things hurt. And before that, I'd gone over to see a neighbor. And she said, "You know, you remind me of the little saying, the old Mother Hubbard that lived in the shoe. She had so many children she didn't know what to do. But she says, you're like the ones that are smarter nowadays. You don't live in a shoe, and you don't have children because you know what to do." Well, you know, that was the last thing that was in my mind, and she doesn't know. She's dead now. But I went home to my little home across the street, and I guess I cried all day long. But anyhow, when I did find out that I was to have a child, I was so happy. And I did everything that I thought was for health. And the baby grew large, and I was small, and when it came time to deliver it, it couldn't be born. I was too small through the pelvis. The doctor made an examination, and he told me that I was only about 13, 14 inches through the pelvis and should be 17 or 18 or even 19 or more, and that the baby was a good-sized, normal baby. And I had been real careful about fats and meats and sugars and things like that, and did the things I thought, but I did drink quite a lot of milk and vegetables and carrots and things that I thought was good. And maybe that all contributed to it. But one good doctor told me, he says, if the baby has the genes to be large, it's going to be large if you starve yourself to death. Well, really, during my pregnancies, I always got thin and my babies grew big, so I guess that was the reason, because I was real careful. I wouldn't eat desserts and things out in public or even at home. But anyway, it was just a terrible ordeal, and I still can feel the weight of that dear little baby on my arm as they brought it to me in the bed, and I couldn't even raise my arms to hold it, or I didn't get up for 20 days. And but he's still a sweet memory, and I hope someday And I believe firmly that someday I'll have the privilege of seeing him again, because I still have a mental picture of his dear little face and his hair. He was wrapped in his blanket, and it was so precious. And even after he was dead and buried, I'd wake up in the night and think, oh, I've got to get up and go out to the toilet for my baby's sake, or something. And then I'd come to that I'd had the baby and it was already gone. Well, we suffered through that, Herman and I. And then I didn't get pregnant with Olene, but the doctor was a good doctor. It was Dr. Bigelow, and he did everything he could to try to bring the baby. But it had to be brought feet first, and just pulled, literally torn, I guess, from me. And it died right during birth. He said if I can get its head, by 7 minutes, he had the whole body, and he says it's alive and beautiful, well, and if I can get the head within 7 minutes, the cord will still be pulsating and the baby would live. But it was, I guess, several hours before he could finally get the baby. And he worked and he did everything. But I guess it just wasn't to be. Sometimes I think that maybe it was an answer to my prayer, because I prayed that a real choice and righteous spirit would be born to me. Maybe he was too righteous to live on this earth and partake of the wickedness, but I do think that he'll have his body and go on. I can't think that the Lord would let a little child be developed and perfect and be in the process of being born and then have it cut off with no further existence. So I have great hopes that someday you'll have another brother that we didn't name or don't know who he is, but I hope that he'll claim us as a family and we'll know him. Well, now you know the story of that, and it went on then for another 2 years. And in the meantime, we got Olene. Dr. Bigelow said the baby coming and all would probably have opened up the way and prepared the body so that maybe my next baby would be normal. A lot of people said, oh, I'd never try to have another baby under any circumstances. That was advice from lots of people, but Dr. Duggins and my dear Aunt Isabel, she told me, she says, if you'll be faithful, the Lord will bless you. And she says, if you don't, and you went to heaven and saw the spirits that said you should have been my mother, but you was too big of a coward to try, why, how will you feel? I couldn't come to you. I had to take somebody that I didn't really want for my mother, and they didn't treat me like you would have done. So I better see if this is recording. Yes, it's recording, and I'm crying, and my voice sounds scratchy, and I said Dr. Bigelow, or Dr. Duggins for Dr. Bigelow. You'll have to excuse me. But we were real happy and excited for Olene, and as usual, Herman wasn't there when I took sick, and so they had to have him come, and we had to have Ella Adair, who was about the only one around with a car, and Mother Paula could ask her if I took sick before, or need to go to the hospital before Herman got home, if we could count on her, and she said yes. She was teaching school. I guess it was her first or second year here, and she was living right across the street in Rose Alstrom, with Rose Alstrom boarding, and she was a good friend with Virginia, and she said yes. And so when I needed to go, they called for Ella Adair, and she had her car, and she took us over to the hospital. Well, we didn't have a hospital. Sister Susie Goff had what she called a maternity home. She had converted some of her rooms into a home for ladies that was going to get children, and she had a makeshift delivery table, and Dr. Bigelow delivered children there, and then she cared for them. She acted as the nurse, and then she took care of them for about 10 days. Always they had to stay in bed then for at least 10 days if everything went normal. So we got Olene, and I guess I had to wait for a day or two before she got there. And Dr. Bigelow was also watching carefully Dora Veeder, who was expecting her baby. And he delivered Dora Veeder's baby that day, and then came in the evening and delivered Olene. He kept made a check a time or two and said he thought I'd go till evening. Well, I went through quite a bit there because she had been a nurse and gone through some, I guess I could say hellish experiences with dying and dead people and laying people out in the war, and that's all she talked about. And it just gave me such a depressed feeling because I was so worried anyway, that it was such a glorious, wonderful feeling when I delivered Olene and knew that she was there and was a little girl, and they said she had lots of hair and that she was a pretty little girl, and they said, oh, already she's sucking her thumb. And Herman was so delighted. He had got there, and we were so happy. Then when everything was all right and we'd settled back down, I think he went back over to Tropic, and Susie Goff took care of me. I remember that about the first thing you had to make some nimmy titty dinners for you, Olene, was a nice, the product from a nice tapioca pudding that the McElbees brought up from the apartment in the basement where they were renting. He was studying to be an undertaker, or else he was one, working in connection with Mrs. Goff some way, and he and his wife Crystal were living there, and Crystal made this pudding and brought up, and it tasted so good. She brought it in just kind of between lunch and I had some, and oh, that tasted good. So that was one of the first things that in the line of dessert. Do you still like tapioca pudding, Olene? I hope so, because that's one of the first things that I remember eating after you was born. Anyway, about the second day, while Sister Goff was gone to take care of Dora, she told me, she warned me, she says, now don't you dare get out of bed, because once I had a lady staying here who walked over to a window and shut it because the draft was coming on her, and she said it killed her. And she said, don't you dare eat anything if anybody brings it, because one time I had a lady that ate a piece of lemon pie, and she said in a day she was dead, and it was that lemon pie that killed her. She had all these old superstitions and things that she kept saying, and she had me pretty well boogered. And so when she came home, but I'd heard Olene, I could listen. I thought maybe I'd go to sleep and wouldn't hear Olene as she cried. She was in a little crib at the side of the bed, a little bassinet. I thought, well, if she cried and cried, and I'd go to sleep. I tried to lay awake at night so I'd hear her as she cried. But you know how it is. And I didn't hear her cry every time, I think, because she didn't have to wake me up, because it seemed like if she stirred the least little bit, I was awake. And I heard her give a little cough like that on her lungs, and I told Mrs. Goff, I said, do you think anything would be wrong with the baby? I heard her give a little cough. And she looked at me kind of funny, says, oh, they all get a little lit in their nose after they have off of their blankets. And she didn't act very alarmed, but while she was gone, to take care of Dora, Olene coughed 2 or 3 times. And I told her, I said, the baby just keeps hacking, and it sounds like it's in her lungs, not in her nose. And she says, well, we'll have to see her. And Olene was kind of going in a stupor, I guess, then, and she called for the doctor. I said, she doesn't cry or anything. I hadn't heard her cry. But I said, she coughs. She keeps coughing. And so then they got the doctor, and when he came, he saw her, and afterwards he said something to Mrs. Goff, and then she come in and she says, I think we'd better name this baby, give it a name. Have you got a name picked out for her? Well, we talked about Olene. We talked about Deloa and 2 or 3 things. I kind of liked Olene, and so did Herman, but we hadn't settled on anything, and we'd started promised Myrtle Ann Dodge that we'd give her one of our names, but we thought Ann Olene, it sounded kind of like gasoline, and Olene Ann was kind of hard to say, so we thought maybe we'd try Myrtle with it, and we said Myrtle Olene, that kind of goes pretty together, and we kind of like Myrtle. I said Myrtle's quite a pretty flower. I quite like Myrtle. So we named her Myrtle. I said I thought we better, maybe we'll settle for Myrtle Olene. And Herman wasn't there, so I had they called for 2 elders to come and name her. Said, I think you better name her for the night. Because Herman was going to come that night, or the next night. He wasn't going to come that night, but maybe another time. He always had to find somebody to bring because we didn't have cars. And so it was Aunt Viola's nephew who was a cutler. And I know the man, but I can't think of his name right now. His wife did some, she was a nurse in the hospital some of the time, and a real good friend or relative to Elva. Elva thought the world and all of her there in Panguitch. But I think that she was Cleo Henry, who was a nurse there's mother, who I can't remember what her name was. If Herman was here, he could tell me. But she got them, and they came and ministered to Olene and gave her a name. They blessed her and gave her a name. And then I wrote a letter and told Herman, and he wrote a letter to me. I got it the next day. But in the meantime, she was having the doctor come every once in a while, and this kept getting worse. Well, finally it got to the place where Olene wasn't even breathing. And she just breathed 1 breath and then missed a breath, and then breathe a breath and miss 2 breaths, and breathe a breath and miss 3 breaths. And he said, you know, most babies, but she was fighting and coughing and trying to live all this while. Well, all on earth he had the doctor with was camphorated oil and the priesthood. Of course, the priesthood's the greatest power on earth, or in heaven even. We know that, and that is what saved Olene's life, because the power of the priesthood that was exercised for her. And I was praying constantly, and they was trying to get her to nurse. She wouldn't nurse much, and the nurse was worried over her, and I was worried over her, and Herman was worried over her, and the doctor, he just kind of crossed his fingers, and he kept putting this big pack of camphorated oil on her chest, and Mrs. Goff had her wrapped up all the time, and the doctor, she said, don't you put your feet out of the bed or take any cold or anything. And the doctor said it was capillary bronchitis. He says, I've had little babies just get that in the winter and in the fall, and says they just give about 1 little cough and then they die. He says they won't fight to live. He says, I don't know whether we can ever save her. And oh, I just was, after being so happy for that little while. And then, you know, my hopes was just shattered, but my faith was still strong, because I just told the Lord, I said, oh, if you'll just save her, I'll just teach her to be the best person. I'll see that she goes to Sunday school and primary and does her duties all her life if I can. And I'll never stop her from doing something in thy kingdom. And I said, I'll try to raise her to be honest and upright and clean and virtuous, and be a help here on the earth. And I just begged the Lord to let us have him and have her. And when Herman, he'd been watching there with her too, and every time the doctor said, don't let her go to sleep, because if she goes to sleep, she won't wake up. He said, when she starts missing these breaths, why, shake her and rouse her, and they just sat and roused her for 2 or 3 days, night and day. And Herman was about exhausted, and the nurse told her, I think you might as well go up in the upstairs, there's a bed there, and go to sleep, and if I need help, I'll call you. And Herman went up to go to sleep, and Mrs. Goff said that I think Nida's mother came over to stay with Mrs. Goff that night, and Olene started to cough, and she didn't cough, and says, I timed her. She coughed for 45 minutes without stopping, and said, I just knew she's going to choke to death, and says, I put a little cotton on my finger and put it in boric acid and put it down in the baby's throat and went around, and she said, and then pulled up to see if I could get some mucus or something up out. It just sounded like she's trying to get mucus up out of her throat. And said, I pulled that up out, and says it broke off just like a piece of meat and flipped and went back. And then she said the baby just went into a coma. And she said, I couldn't see that she was even alive. So she just turned pale and went into a coma. And she said, I felt for her pulse, and she didn't have a pulse. She said she didn't have a sign of a pulse for 8 minutes. She said she didn't even have a pulse, and she called Herman, and she said, oh, the baby's gone. Herman, come down here. And Daddy just came down and kneeled right down, and he just begged the Lord for Olene, and she began to just gasp. He could tell you better about what happened then than I could. And then she seemed to, from then on, she kind of seemed to get a little bit better. And the doctor the next morning, he came and said, well, when he tested her, he said, well, I'll tell you, she's been like she was lost in a great, dark, deep black forest, and says she struggled and struggled, and she says she can now just see a little glimmer of light through the trees, and that's the only hope, and says if she can keep on. And so that was our little hope that we was clinging on to, that she could just slowly make it back. And we know that it was the priesthood that saved her and gave us our little darling, and she's always been our darling. And after about 20 days, we was able to bring her home. But the doctor told me if she ever gets a cold this whole winter, she'll never make it. And he said, don't you ever try to wash or mop or get your hands in cold water. You've got to breastfeed this baby to keep her nourished. And we didn't give him formula then. We breastfed him. And she said, if she gets one more cold, she will not survive the winter. And don't let people in your house. I don't care if you insult them. And she said, you sleep with this baby every night and keep her wrapped up and warm and cuddled right close to you. And said, when you bathe her, you just take one arm out at a time and bathe it and dry it and put it back. And you do it in front of a fire where it's warm. And just bathe her a little part at a time. And don't take this canvas, this padding and flannel off of her little chest only once every 2 or 3 days, and then replace it just as fast as you can. And I just wondered if I could raise her. And Herman had to go back to the herd. Dad was pressing him every minute to get back out to the herd. It was a bad winter, and the sheep were snowed in, and I just was there alone. And I didn't dare to let anybody in, and I was just there alone. He hired somebody to get a lot of wood and stack up, and I just kept fire day and night, and I kept the light turned way down low by my bed, and I had it on this stand right by the bed, and our bed was in the front room, and the little stove was over in the other corner, and I just cuddled by her all winter long. And the only people I'd see, it snowed so deep that we couldn't even see the mail truck coming through. The snow was piled up on this highway so bad, and they'd plowed it open so many times that it had made such a high drift out there in the lane that you couldn't even see the mail truck coming through the lane. And there wasn't even a trail broke from my front gate to my front door all winter long. If Mother Paulette and Ida came through the snow from her place across to mine every once in a while, but not very often. She had little Maggie living with her, and she's expecting Arden, and she was pregnant, and a time or two she came over, and there was kind of a trail that they could get across from the woodpile. We had to go to the bathroom outside, but he told me, don't you go to an outdoor bathroom, you just use a potty and empty it, And so that was just the circumstances under which he had me live. Well, I couldn't get anybody to do my washing. Nobody wanted to scrub somebody's baby's clothes on the washboard. Herman went to the herd thinking Virginia'd do it, and she did it once or twice, and then she just wouldn't do it. I don't know whether he thought we wouldn't pay her. And finally they got Verna B. And she was Verna riding then. And she would come every Sunday and take my dirty clothes, my baby's clothes, the dirty diapers and all, take them and wash them, and take them up to her place, and Cleo and her together would take care of that laundry, and then she'd bring it back down to me. And that's when I learned to love Verna with all my heart. She was just faithful to me until till my little sweet darling got to where I could do things for myself. And when she got to where she wasn't in danger anymore, 2 or 3 months old, 3 or 4 months old, kind of broke spring, maybe along in February, March. Mother Pollock used to come down after meetings. She was in the Relief Society, and she'd come down once in a while, maybe after Relief Society, and just come in for a minute. She didn't take the baby or anything. You know, she'd just come and look at her and see that she's still alive, and it was a joy to have her come. And the only person I could see at all was out my south windows, and that was Hen Jolly, and he'd come over across the street and feed his cattle once a day, dig hay out of a big hayloft, and I used to wait for him to come and dig that out just to see somebody alive. I was so lonesome down there alone and so worried. But she just grew fat and happy and got better, and she worried and she coughed and she did those things for quite a while, but I took care of her, and she finally got to where she was better. And then on the 4th of July that year, Sunday came on the 4th of July, her daddy blessed her and named her in the chapel, and that's the blessing that's recorded for her name and blessing. But in the meantime, the day after we had her blessed in the hospital, or in the nursing home, I got a letter from Herman, and he said, we had better not name our little darling Olene, because there's one of the McClellans has a boy named Olene, and she was already named Olene, but we didn't spell them the same way, and he wasn't her same age, and so it was all right anyway. Well, she was a darling. And that spring, Elva was expecting Roger, and she came over. No, let's see. I guess Roger was the one that she was pregnant with. I'm not sure, but anyhow, we had our babies kind of hit and miss. But they came in the spring, and I could get Olene out, and oh, she grew to be such a beautiful little girl. Everybody made over her. But one time during the winter, after it was opening up a little bit and there was a space so people could come in a little bit and I wasn't afraid, I got a knock at the door, and it was Leon Jolly, and she'd come to see the baby. She said, oh, she just made over Olene, so cute. And she says, can I undress her little backside? And I let her take the diaper off, and she turned her up and kissed her little bare bum, and she says, that's the cutest part of the baby. She says, oh, isn't that precious? She says, just see those little creases on those little legs and that little buttocks. And she just kissed her little tummy right there, and then she put her diaper back on and visited a while and then went. And Cleo Riding and Rose Johnson had been my counselor, I'd worked as one of the counselors in the primary with them. In fact, I was still their counselor. And they came to see me one time, and they said, just unbeknownst, after she was better, and we kind of got over the danger of having people come in and bring her a cold, they came down, and they said, we've come to spend the day with you. So I hustled up something for them for lunch, and they'd brought their handwork, and we sit there and visited, and we had the best day. And they said, oh, isn't she cute? Isn't she the best baby you ever did see? And so every time she'd fret, I'd run to the basket and feel to see if she was wet, and if she did, I dried her and got a dry diaper and put on her. And so Rose, she says, now I'll change her the next time, and I'll show you how it's done. So when she wet the next time, she went and got a dry diaper and put on her and put the wet one on a chair by the fire so it'd dry. And she says, I'll change her the next time too. And so then she put the one that had been dried out on. Well, that nearly broke my heart. I think she dried out a PD diaper and put back on her the second time. And then she laughed after it and said, you are so fussy with her and keep her so spotless, that she said, I did that just to tease you, to show you that she wouldn't die if you put a diaper that had been used once back on her. So we laughed about that, and we had quite a bit of fun. But one night when I was there all alone and so worried, and there was no trail broke in my place, and I kept this light turned way down low, and we all had a horror of being out in that lane alone, Nida and I especially, because we was the first people that anybody could contact if they saw a light in her house in the night if they'd come in. And I got a knock at the front door, and there hadn't even been a trail around there. And I'd had that door locked. And I went and unlocked it, and I put on a house coat and went to the door and just peeped out a little bit, and it was old man Ray. He'd come through the hills from the coal mine and wanted to know if I had, and it was about midnight or 1 o'clock, wanted to know if I had a Sears and Roebuck catalog. Well, I didn't have. I don't know why he had to come in the middle of the night to borrow a Sears and Roebuck catalog. And I didn't have one. I guess that's the only good excuse he could think of. He was just an old wandering coot, and I just said, well, I've got a sick baby, and I can't hold this door open, and I don't have a catalog, and I shut it in his face. And you know, that just about scared me to death. I just laid there and shook after that. So I went through quite a bit to get sister, but oh, how I have loved and enjoyed her. Of course, my family hadn't seen Olene, and so when it came kind of in the summer, I decided that we could go with Elva over to her house and stay over, and then Jim would take us all over to see Grandpa Roundy. And I would stay a few days, and then he'd come back and pick me up and bring me back over to Tropic, and that just sounded like such a good vacation. And so we went over there. And I stayed overnight with Elva. And somehow, I don't know, I guess the bed bugs was just starting to come out right good. Because Olene was just spotted all over the next morning from bed bug bites, and I had to take her and show her off that first day, all covered with bed bug bites all over her face, little red blotches, bites all over her face, and that was quite embarrassing to me. And they didn't bother Arlene. She had more of an olive complexion, and they didn't bother her a bit, but they sure did feast on Olene. Well, anyhow, I stayed a day or two over to Grandpa's, and all at once Olene got to feeling, acting like she just was sick or something. She wouldn't eat, she wouldn't laugh. I'd try to play with her and get her to laugh a little bit, and she wouldn't smile. And I thought, oh, she's sick, I better take her home, and maybe I can get somebody to take me over to Dr. Bigelow and see what's wrong. And I got home and put her in her little bassinet I had for her, and I had some little toys there. She looked around and saw her toys and her house, and she just began to kick her little cute feet and make the cutest cooey, laughy sounds and just act as a tickle. And you know, all on earth that ailed her, she was homesick for her own little home. That was all that was wrong. She just acted perfectly normal. She'd eat her meals, and she just acted like there was nothing, like we'd never left home. She just got homesick after about a day, and she couldn't stand it over there. Because of that, she missed everything. She knew she was somewhere where she hadn't ought to be, and it just worried me. I thought something was terribly wrong, but that's what cured it, was to bring her back to her own little bassinet. Well, I had made such darling things. I'd saved a lot of the things that I had from my first baby, and then I added to the layette, and I had lots of pretty handwork with lace and embroidery and ribbons and things, and she looked just like a little doll. And one day a knock came at the door, and it was Ben Baugh, and he was he was Sherman Baugh's father, and he was a little cute Englishman. And he came down, well, when we was married, he came down the morning after we got home, and he sang, I've been and got married today, I've been and got married today. And he sang the song, and it was cute. And then he came down and kissed Olene this time in her crib, and came down to see her, and he reached down. He sang some cute little song about a baby. I don't know what it was. And then he reached down and kissed her on the forehead and kissed her little hands, and then he took back up the street again. So she had lots of little good wishes and things from people. Olene was kind of slow walking, and she was slow cutting her teeth. Before she was a year old, she hadn't cut her teeth, and she hadn't walked. In Lemoyne and Verdine she tried to walk and would have walked. She was almost to take steps, and they was trying to get her to walk from one to the other, back and forth. They were just young kids, and they didn't watch her careful enough, and she fell right on a bunch of blocks and toys, and it really hurt her quite bad. They just let her go, and it hit her head and that, and it scared her, and she cried. And then after that, she wouldn't ever walk. She'd take hold of your hand, and she could just step it off and walk so cute, but she wouldn't go alone. She'd even take hold of a pencil you was holding in your hand, and she could just step and balance and walk, but you'd take that out of her hand and get her to try to take a step alone, and she'd just start to shake and sit down. I think she could remember getting hurt, on her own, and so she didn't try to walk until she was, about 16 months old. And the day she found out she could walk, she just about exhausted herself. She would walk we had a washer in the corner of the kitchen, and you'd have to go through the kitchen, through the living room, and turn north and into the bedroom, and she'd go in and hit the stool in front of the dresser with her hands, and then she'd walk back and hit the washer with her hands, and she went back and forth, and I couldn't stop her hardly all day long. And the minute she'd climb up and get ready to go, she'd do that same thing over all day long. She walked back and forth, in and out of that bedroom and kitchen. She'd just pant and swing her hands by her side, and the way she'd go. She found out she could go on her own, and boy, was she independent about it. And then on, she was a good little walker. I know things aren't going to be right chronologically, but when she was, only about not much over a year old, she started to kind of talk, and she knew Bishop Ott. We'd go up at the store, and Bishop Ott would say, "Who am I?" And she'd say, "Bishop Ott." And that tickled him so much, and she was so little, that she could say Bishop Ott. And then one time she was sitting on the floor just after I'd got her bathed, and she looked so cute with her little ringlets hanging down in her pajamas, and she's sitting there, and the first thing I knew, Grandpa came in, and she was sitting there so busy she didn't even look up. And we walked over and kind of tapped her on the head with the paper he had in her hand, and he says, "What you doing, Olene?" And she looked up and she says, "I getting out the jelly toe." Well, see, I had washed her little feet time and again and got the little dust and stuff out in between her toes, and said, "Now we're getting out the toe jam." So she said, "I'm getting out the jelly toe." Well, that tickled Grandpa Pollock. I did have one baby picture of her, and I think it was when she's about 7 months old, sitting on the bed. And that was quite cute of her. And then, when Gail was just a baby, a fellow came along to take their pictures, and Gail's hair had come out quite bad, and I didn't want to take a picture of him with his hair out. I wanted him to get a little bit more, he'd lost his baby hair and looked kind of bald-headed. And so I just had that picture alone of Olene with her little curls and things. But she was nearly 2 years old then. But I know when she had her first birthday, we had kind of a party with Arden and Devon when she was a year old. And we got together and had some little thing. I don't think they could eat much, but Devon and Arden, especially Devon, could have a few treats. But the little kids, they mostly just had something real careful, like yellow cake and maybe a little ice cream or something. But they kind of had what was the birthday party, but I didn't get a picture of that because we couldn't get film very good then, and so I didn't have many pictures of when they were little. That makes me feel kind of bad too. I've got a lot of pictures in my mind of the cute things they did and the cute things they said. But she used to always call Gail Buddy Boy. And one time he got her box of candy that she'd got up at the Christmas. It was her, I guess her second year when Herman took her up to the Christmas program. Gail was only about a part of a year. He was just a baby, in fact. And I'd stayed home with him, and he took Olene up, and she left it there. He wasn't very old. She got this box. Anyhow, he got a piece in his throat. No, she must have been about 3 then, because he was about a year old, I guess. And he got this piece in his throat and just about choked to death on a piece of candy he got out of her Christmas box that she hung on a limb on the tree. And I can't even remember the things she got, but the things that she got for toys and things that through the years, Devon and Arden made quite short work of, because they was boys and really rough, and she had to kind of keep them hid away. And Devon liked to snatch her things from her and then run. He was playful and kind of mischievous, and I don't think he did it to be mean, but just in fun. But he'd grab her doll, and he ran one time and took her doll and threw it down in the toilet hole. And it was bad, you know. We never did get it out. And she'd go out there and just stand and look down in there and cry for that doll. I couldn't hardly keep her away, and every time she knew it was in there because she saw him throw it in. He run and put it in, and then he showed her where he put it, and she'd cry. Well, one time when they got a little bigger and was really having kind of lots of playtimes together, they was playing in the sand, and Arden went down her back. Oh, boy, that made her mad. It made me quite aggravated, too, but, you know, he just came up, and I don't know why, but she was sitting with her back to him, and he just wet right down her back. I think there's about 3. And I took her and came right home.